This is a piece of copper wire, about 6 inches long, the kind that runs through the walls of your house connecting outlets to breaker boxes. It weighs maybe half an ounce. At today's prices, the copper in this wire is worth about 12 cents. But here's what's strange. This same piece of wire, this 12 cents of copper, is now the subject of emergency meetings at the Pentagon, frantic calls between mining executives and government officials, and classified briefings in Washington about national security implications of metal shortages. Copper. The metal so common we use it for pennies. The metal humanity has worked for 5,000 years. The metal that's supposed to be everywhere is suddenly not enough. And the price is telling you something that supply chain managers have known for 18 months. We are running out. Not eventually, not theoretically, now. On January 6, 2026, copper futures on the COMEX exchange closed at $5.24 per pound, an all-time high. Not an inflation-adjusted high, an absolute high. Higher than the 2011 commodity supercycle. Higher than the 2021 post-COVID surge. Higher than any price in the 140-year history of industrial copper trading. The financial press reported it as a one-day story. Copper hits record amid supply concerns. Then they moved on to earnings reports and Fed speculation. What they didn't explain is why this price matters more than any commodity movement of the past decade. This is not about copper getting expensive. This is about the physical foundation of the energy transition, the AI revolution, and modern warfare simultaneously discovering that they all need the same metal, and there isn't enough of it. Here's what they're not telling you. Copper demand has grown at roughly 3% per year for the past century. Predictable, manageable. Mining companies could plan expansions knowing that demand growth would absorb new supply over 10 to 15-year project cycles. That model broke in 2023. 3 demand shocks hit simultaneously, and their combined effect is still not reflected in mainstream forecasts. First, electric vehicles. A conventional internal combustion car contains about 50 pounds of copper, wiring, motors, radiators. A battery electric vehicle contains 180 pounds. An electric bus contains 800 pounds. The global EV fleet grew from 10 million vehicles in 2020 to 47 million in 2025. By 2030, projections show 250 million electric vehicles on the road. That's not 3% annual demand growth. That's a step function increase that requires copper mining to nearly double in less than a decade. Second, renewable energy. A natural gas power plant requires about 1 ton of copper per megawatt of capacity. A solar installation requires 5 tons. An offshore wind farm requires 15 tons. The world added 510 gigawatts of renewable capacity in 2025 alone. At average copper intensity, that's 3.2 million tons of demand from one sector in 1 year, roughly 12% of total global production consumed by renewable build-out. Third, artificial intelligence. This one caught everyone by surprise. A single AI data center, the kind being built by Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta at a rate of 50 per year, requires 30,000 tons of copper for power distribution, cooling systems, and server infrastructure. The AI build-out that began in 2023 is adding 1.5 million tons of annual copper demand that didn't exist in any forecast 3 years ago. Add these together. EVs, 2.1 million tons of new annual demand by 2026. Renewables, 3.2 million tons. AI data centers, 1.5 million tons. Total new demand, 6.8 million tons per year, on top of a baseline market of 26 million tons. That's a 26% demand increase in 3 years. The supply response required to meet it doesn't exist. This is where the lie becomes unsustainable. To understand why supply can't respond, you need to understand how copper mining actually works. Copper doesn't come from a factory you can build in 18 months. It comes from geological deposits formed over hundreds of millions of years, located in remote regions, requiring massive infrastructure to extract. The average time from discovering a copper deposit to producing the first pound of metal is 16.5 years. That's not bureaucratic delay. That's the physical reality of building roads to remote locations, constructing processing facilities, securing water rights, negotiating with governments, and developing mines that operate for decades. The projects that will produce copper in 2026 were approved in 2010. The projects approved today will produce copper in 2042. There is no mechanism to accelerate this timeline. You cannot will copper deposits into existence. You cannot speed up geological processes. You cannot compress 16 years of development into 3 because the price went up. The major mining companies, BHP, Rio Tinto, Freeport-McMoRan, Glencore, understand this constraint. Their capital expenditure plans show it. Despite record copper prices, mining investment in 2025 was only 8% above 2024 levels. Not because companies don't want to invest, because there aren't enough viable projects to invest in. The world's largest undeveloped copper deposit is Reko Diq in Pakistan, 11 million tons of contained copper. Development timeline, 2028 at the earliest, full production by 2034. The second largest is Resolution in Arizona, 1.8 million tons, blocked by environmental litigation since 2014. Timeline, uncertain. The third largest is Tampakan in the Philippines, 2.4 million tons, suspended due to local government mining bans. Timeline, unknown. The deposits exist. The ability to develop them in time does not. Meanwhile, existing mines are depleting. The average copper ore grade, the percentage of copper in mined rock, has fallen from 1.5% in 1990 to 0.62% today. Miners must move 2.4 times more rock to produce the same amount of copper. This requires more energy, more water, more equipment, more time. Productivity per mine has declined 25% in the past decade, even as investment increased. When markets discover what copper miners have known for years, price becomes the rationing mechanism. The $5.24 price on January 6th wasn't a spike, it was a signal. The signal says, there is not enough copper for everyone who wants it. Someone will not get copper. Price determines who. At $4 copper, marginal projects become economic, and supply increases slightly over 5 to 10 years. At $5 copper, demand destruction begins. Projects get delayed, specifications get changed, substitution increases where possible. At $6 copper, rationing becomes explicit. Governments start stockpiling. Export restrictions emerge. Strategic allocation replaces market allocation. The trajectory suggests $6 copper by summer, not because speculators are bidding it up, but because physical buyers, utilities, automakers, defense contractors, are securing supply at any price rather than risk not having it at all. Less than 45 days remain before Q1 earnings calls, when major industrial companies must disclose their copper procurement status. The language in those calls will reveal whether the shortage is manageable or existential. Companies that secured long-term supply contracts will report normally. Companies that didn't will announce project delays, margin compression, and revised guidance. The tell will be which sectors delay first. If it's consumer electronics, the shortage is moderate. If it's EVs and renewables, the shortage threatens the energy transition. If it's defense contractors, the shortage becomes a national security crisis that triggers government intervention. While one side scrambles, the other side stockpiles. China's behavior in copper markets tells you everything about their assessment of the shortage. The State Reserve Bureau of China has purchased 2.3 million tons of copper since January 2024, the largest strategic stockpiling program since the Cold War. They haven't announced these purchases. They don't publish inventory levels. The data comes from tracking imports against domestic consumption and noting the 400,000-ton annual discrepancy that disappears into government warehouses. China processes 54% of global copper. They understand supply chains better than any Western analyst. Their response to the demand shock wasn't to wait for markets to balance. It was to secure physical supply before prices made strategic stockpiling prohibitively expensive. At 2:15 a.m. Beijing time on January 8th, China's State Council approved emergency measures designating copper a strategic resource subject to export licensing. Not an export ban, yet, but the infrastructure to implement one within days if leadership chooses. The measure received no coverage in Western media. The Chinese government notice is public, in Mandarin, on a provincial trade ministry website. This is how nations behave when they see a shortage coming. They secure supply. They build bureaucratic authority to restrict flows. They position for a world where copper allocation is political, not commercial. The United States has done nothing comparable. The Strategic National Defense Stockpile contains 9,000 tons of copper, less than 2 days of domestic consumption. There is no emergency procurement program. There is no export licensing framework. There is no plan for what happens when copper prices hit $7 and allies start competing for limited supply. This is what a supply crisis looks like before it becomes visible. The price signal at $5.24 is the early warning. The signal says, demand has exceeded supply's ability to respond. The signal says, the projects that could have closed this gap were never built. The signal says, by the time the shortage is obvious, positioning will be complete and options will be limited. Every EV mandate, every renewable target, Every AI data center announcement assumes copper will be available at scale. None of them account for the 16.5-year development timeline. None of them model a world where copper becomes the binding constraint on the energy transition itself. Some will see the price spike and expect mean reversion. We'll assume that $5.24 copper invites supply response that will crash prices back to $3.50. We'll trust that markets always balance, that shortages create solutions, that capitalism solves resource constraints through price incentives. These are the same voices that said oil would stay below $50 forever because shale had unlimited supply. That said lithium shortages would resolve within 2 years. That said semiconductor shortages were temporary blips that markets would quickly correct. Copper is not semiconductors. You cannot build a new copper fab in Arizona. The copper is where the copper is: Chile, Peru, Congo, Indonesia. And the infrastructure to extract it takes longer than political cycles, longer than corporate planning horizons, longer than the AI build-out that's consuming supply nobody forecasted. Others will read the depletion curves, will track the permitting timelines, will notice that Chinese strategic stockpiling has accelerated while Western strategic reserves remain empty. Will understand that $5.24 is not a top, but a waypoint, a price that reflects current shortage, not future shortage, because futures markets cannot price what supply chains haven't yet discovered. The informed are not speculating on copper prices. They're recognizing that copper has become the limiting reagent in 3 simultaneous industrial revolutions. That the energy transition requires copper, that the AI revolution requires copper, that the defense modernization requires copper, and that there is not enough copper for all 3. What the informed understand is that shortage doesn't distribute equally. Countries that secured supply early, China, will complete their transitions. Countries that assumed markets would provide, most of the West, will face delays, cost overruns, and strategic vulnerabilities that compound for decades. This is not financial advice. This is not a recommendation to buy copper futures or mining stocks or physical metal. This is simply an observation about what happens when demand grows 26% in 3 years and supply cannot respond for 16 years. The price at $5.24 is the market's attempt to communicate something that conference slides and policy papers have failed to convey. We did not build the mines. We did not approve the projects. We did not plan for the world we're now trying to build. The copper was supposed to be there. It isn't. The price is telling you the truth that planners ignored. 12 cents of wire in your hand. The entire energy transition, AI revolution, and defense industrial base competing for the same atoms. The shortage isn't coming. The shortage is here. $5.24 per pound is just the market learning what the copper already knew. There isn't enough.